Someone Like You by Sparkypasker. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 52. Aizawa looked up at the gym. It looked respectable enough, but he didn't trust it. Embers crackled low in his gut, just waiting to blaze to life. He had to breathe. If he went in there angry enough to burn Endeavor to a crisp, he wouldn't get anywhere questioning the owner about Midoriya. Between getting him back from the Hero Public Safety Commission, the fallout from the Shie raid, his regular patrols, and taking care of 19 teenagers, the progress made on the investigation into Midoriya Izuku's past had been slow. All they had really been able to verify was that he had been working for a cafe, and that the owner had abruptly shut down the cafe and run off to Canada when Midoriya got arrested. Personally, Aizawa thought that was an overreaction. He and Tsukauchi found out she had been underpaying Midoriya, but not to the extent that she would be jailed. Just enough to claim he was being paid minimum wage, despite the fact that no one had actually been paid only the minimum wage in decades. Something about the situation irked Aizawa, but he couldn't quite figure out what. Tsukauchi had sent in a request to Foreign Affairs in an attempt to compel the woman to answer their questions. Unfortunately, no laws were actually broken, and she was being treated as more of a witness, and the other country had no obligation to force their citizens, even dual citizens, to comply with another country. So for now, they had to continue with their next witness. And that brought them to the gym. Its reputation had taken quite the beating when it was revealed Midoriya had been a client, but there were enough heteromorphs and people with, quote, villainous quirks to keep it going. It hadn't taken long to discover that another one of his students, Shinso Hitoshi, was a member of this gym as well. He had told Aizawa it was the only gym in the city that would allow you to register without forcing you to document your quirk. There was a spot to put it on the registration form, but you were not required to state it. Aizawa wasn't sure how Kimura Iyashi handled his liability insurance if that was the case. Maybe there was a clause in the membership form that made the member responsible for any damages they caused. That seemed most likely. Aizawa's emotions were becoming more muddled the longer he waited in the nearby alley for Tsukauchi to show up. Kimura was obviously negligent for failing to report an abused child, but if it weren't for him, Shinso would probably not have made it into the hero course. At least, not right away. He could have gotten in through the sports festival as long as Aizawa became aware of him early enough and had had enough time to train him. Thankfully, it hadn't come to that. Just as Aizawa's mental train was about to switch tracks, Tsukauchi walked from around the corner of the block, eyes glued to his phone. Aizawa stepped out of the shadows of the alley right as Tsukauchi was passing by. Aizawa's sudden appearance startled Tsukauchi, his phone slipping out of his hand as his whole body jerked from fright. Tsukauchi fumbled for a couple seconds before ultimately dropping the phone with a squeak. Before the phone could crash onto the ground, Aizawa caught it with his foot, then tossed it back up into the air, catching it easily with his hand. "You seemed a little distracted," Aizawa stated, handing Tsukauchi his phone. "Yeah, just talking with All Might. He said he had something he wanted to talk about, but couldn't do it over the phone. We were making plans to meet tonight," Tsukauchi explained. "Ah, I see." Aizawa nodded. He didn't really care about what All Might did in his spare time, so he wasn't particularly interested. "Well, now that you are here, we can head inside." Tsukauchi nodded, reached into his pocket, and picked out a small notebook. He flipped through it. Aizawa noticed quite the mix of questions, descriptions, and a website. Was Midoriya being abused online? Aizawa asked apprehensively. They had far too much work on their hands with this case and almost no resources. He was going to have to ask Nedzu for help if they were going to have to find people online. They could be anywhere in the country. Tsukauchi stopped flipping momentarily to find the page with the website and look at his notes. "Well, yes, probably, but not from this website if that's what you're asking. This is a site we happen to find that offers support for quirkless individuals. I'm not too sure how, but the administrator is able to make sure the only people who join are quirkless and kick out anyone who could be a danger to the other members. We assume it's probably someone with a quirk that works on computers, but we are planning to contact them and see if they would be willing to allow us to ask for volunteers to come in and answer some questions. How did you find the website? We got an anonymous tip from somewhere. I don't really understand it myself. It said it came from nowhere. Nowhere. Yeah, but it obviously came from somewhere. Either way, we can figure it out after we talk to Kimura. Aizawa sighed. Just another thing to add to my to-do list. He turned away from Tsukauchi and entered the gym. Tsukauchi followed behind, paper rustling. Aizawa assumed he was resuming his search for an empty space in his notebook. The gym looked quite different from what Aizawa had imagined. He was used to gyms having specialized equipment for a variety of different types of quirks, ranging from extra-large weights for strength enhancement quirks to equipment made of special material to withstand elemental quirks, and lounges for trainers and managers to comfortably watch over their clients. There were a couple different sizes, but the equipment was all largely the same, and absolutely ancient. Aizawa was fairly certain the only place he had seen machines like this was in a hero museum when they talked about how the first generation of heroes trained. There was one that was literally just a belt on a few rollers and had something that looked like handlebars to make sure you didn't fall off while running on it. It didn't seem very effective. No surface you would ever run on in real life was going to be as flat as that. There would be bumps and dips in the roads at the very least. If you want to run on something, just run outside. Then there were a few types of machines that were very similar to those that were still used today. Basically just chairs attached to weights. Primitive, Aizawa supposed, but they would do the trick. Hello! Aizawa was broken from his self-tour by a cheerful greeting. Kimura Iyashi emerged from a room behind the counter that was situated just inside the door of the gym. How can I help you gentlemen today? He asked with a smile. I am Detective Tsukauchi with the Mustafa Police Department, Tsukauchi said, flipping open his wallet to show his identification. This is Eraserhead, a hero. Aizawa nodded in Kimura's direction. We would like to ask you a few questions about Midoriya Izuku. Recognition sparked in Kimura's eyes. Oh, yeah, the quirkless kid. Or maybe not quirkless? Either way, doesn't really matter to me, he said with a shrug. Tsukauchi nodded. Yes. First, how long ago did he join as a member? Oh, I don't know. Maybe a little more than a year ago? Year and a half by this point? Kimura crossed his arms and tilted his head to the side. He would come a few times a week for a couple of hours. Real polite. Made sure to clean his machines thoroughly after using them. It's been a while since I have been to a gym. Is that not common? I thought you had to clean the machines after using them to prevent spreading fungal infections. Aizawa commented. Oh, you definitely do. But with the disinfection properties of the chemicals that are most commonly used, you don't really need to do much more than a quick wipe down. He would make sure to damn near soak every nook and cranny, even in the areas he hadn't actually touched. That's how you used to have to do it back in the day. I know the other members were really grateful. Why's that? Tsukauchi asked. Although all you need to do is a quick wipe down to prevent the spread of infection, a deeper clean helps prevent the spread of quirklessness. Aizawa's eyes snapped to Kimura's. Quirklessness can't be spread. Kimura sighed in exasperation. I know that, but public sentiment is hard to change. If I wanted to stay in business, I had to go with the flow. And how would the other members have known he's quirkless? I thought disclosure of your quirk wasn't necessary, Tsukauchi asked, writing down notes. That's my bad. I may have made a few comments about Midoriya's progress a little too loudly while others were present. In my defense, it was extremely impressive. I couldn't help myself. Then after that, well, you know how people talk. And how did you find out he was quirkless? Tsukauchi followed up. He had been a member for about 10 months, maybe, and I had been trying to figure it out the entire time. We may not ask about quirks, but if I know what your quirk is, I can help them reach their goals better. That's just common knowledge. So I just outright asked him, and he told me. But after that, it was so obvious. I should have known right from the beginning. Why's that? Well, I may not have seen many, but all the quirkless people I have ever seen all look the same. He had all the signs. He was short and skinny. His hair was kind of wiry. He had black marks on his arms. Yeah, he definitely looked like a quirkless kid, but he didn't act like a quirkless kid. So that's probably why it didn't register immediately. And what do quirkless kids act like? Aizawa said slowly. Tsukauchi stopped writing and looked at Aizawa, whose eyes were glued to Kimura. The gym owner was going to have to be very careful of what he said next. Tsukauchi himself didn't really want to move, lest he divert Aizawa's attention toward himself instead. Kimura scrunched his face up, giving Aizawa a weird look. You know, they kind of fold in on themselves when they're in public. They stick to the shadows and try not to meet anyone's eyes. Abuse. Aizawa interrupted. What? Kimura asked, not comprehending. You're describing signs of abuse. You saw someone who clearly showed physical signs of abuse and masking. Why didn't you call the police? How many people have walked through those doors that were being abused and you just allowed it to keep happening? That's not my job, nor my concern, Kimura stated. What? Aizawa seethed. It is not my job to police what happens outside my business. If any abuse were to happen inside, the perpetrators would be expelled. That is my job. Making sure my members are safe within these walls. That is my concern. Whatever happens outside, that has nothing to do with me. Even if the victim is a child? Aizawa asked through clenched teeth. Midoriya is not a child. You treating him like one is insulting. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Aizawa glared at the man, then abruptly turned and walked out the door. Tsukauchi thanked Kimura for his cooperation and followed Aizawa out into the street. I want him arrested, Aizawa barked at Tsukauchi. You know as well as I do that he didn't do anything illegal, Tsukauchi grumbled. Nothing illegal! He allowed a child to continue to go home to his abuser. He didn't even report it. That's right, Tsukauchi yelled back. Although he has a healing quirk, he is not a medical professional. He has no obligation to report any kind of abuse. And even if he did, he believed Midoriya was an adult and would not have had to report anything anyway. And even if he did meet all the mandatory reporter requirements, there are still no criminal consequences for failing to report. There is nothing we can do. Aizawa turned around to face the wall. Damn it! He yelled with a punch. Tsukauchi grabbed his arm before he could punch it again. Look, there may be nothing we can do about it, but we have a statement describing what Midoriya was like before becoming a crime fighter. At the very least, we can use this information in the case against his parents. Someday, he will be safe. He will heal. We just need to do our jobs to make that easier for him. I hate how you're always right, Aizawa grumbled, shaking his hand to dispel the pain. And don't you forget it. Chapter 53. Now Masa walked up to the door of All Might's, or rather, Yagi Toshinori's apartment. He had one at the teachers' dorms in UA, but he wanted a little more privacy for whatever discussion they were going to have, so they were meeting here instead. Now Masa sometimes wondered why his friend never sold this apartment, but supposed it had something to do with his need to separate his professional and private lives. Now Masa barely knocked on the door when it nearly swung off its hinges. Toshinori stood on the other side, hair looking as if he'd been running his hands through it constantly since he woke up that morning. Or maybe he never even slept? The bags under his eyes rivaled Aizawa's, but made him look sickly when partnered with his sunken cheeks and exposed collarbones. God, he was looking worse than Midoriya. Naomasa entered the apartment when Toshinori turned around and walked down a hallway, running his hand through his hair. Naomasa followed Toshinori into his living room, where he found Toshinori sitting on his oversized couch, his head in his hands, clutching his hair, and his elbows pressing into his thighs. Toshinori, what's going on? Naomasa asked, sitting next to his friend and becoming increasingly worried. Now, Toshinori said, voice trembling but rough, as if he had been screaming. I'm a murderer. Toshinori broke. Tears streamed down his face in rivers, and sobs racked his body. He shook with each cry and wheezed with every inhale. It broke Naomasa in ways he couldn't describe. He worked with grieving families and victims every day, but he was always able to keep up a wall to stop himself from becoming too invested. If he empathized too much, he wouldn't be able to catch the villain who caused the grief in the first place. But this time, it was different. He had known Toshinori for years, ever since he had returned from the United States, and Naomasa was only just entering the police academy. Toshinori had broken down Naomasa's walls years ago. There was no way for Naomasa to protect himself from the agony his friend was experiencing. I don't understand, Naomasa said smoothly, placing his hand on Toshinori's shoulder, trying to stop his own tears from falling. I killed someone. Toshinori dropped his hands from his head and allowed them to fall between his legs. The bags under Toshinori's eyes looked darker when surrounded by his bright red and puffy eyes. I killed a child, a 10-year-old. They were crushed under a building when I was fighting a villain. Oh. How is Naomasa supposed to respond? How was he supposed to say he knew, that he was fully aware of All Might's body count? He must have been silent for too long, because Toshinori continued, I know. He huffed a half-hearted laugh. I couldn't kill all for one, but had no problems killing a child. Toshinori glanced at Naomasa. Now? Toshinori questioned. Naomasa could only imagine the image Toshinori saw. Probably a look of conflict, because that's how Naomasa felt. Conflicted. Should he pretend he didn't know anything and just be there to support his friend? Or does he tell Toshinori everything? He deserved to know, right? Toshi. Naomasa started slowly. It's just not one. Toshinori looked at Naomasa in shock and started to turn green. What? Toshinori asked. Naomasa turned to face Toshinori more completely. It's become common knowledge within the emergency response community that there will be 1 or 2 deaths associated with any large-scale fights that involve you. Toshinori quickly transitioned from green to paper white. How many? Toshinori asked quietly. How many? Toshinori interrupted with a yell. I don't know the exact number, but probably close to 1,000 or maybe more over the course of your career. Toshinori's eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he began to sway until he finally fell off the couch. He rolled over onto his hands and knees and dry heaved. As much as it hurt Naomasa to think, it was probably good he didn't have a stomach right now. Naomasa carefully dropped off the couch and kneeled next to his friend. He put a hand on Toshinori's back and rubbed it in circles. Hey, everything's okay. Things like this are considered natural deaths. Natural? Toshinori yelled at the floor. There's nothing natural about being murdered. Naomasa was so glad Toshinori had opted to get extra insulation installed shortly after he purchased the apartment. There would have been a lot of questions otherwise. Toshi, Things like this just happen with heroes, especially early in their careers. You're not special. Tell me, Naomasa. Toshinori looked Naomasa straight in the eyes for the first time since Naomasa had shown up on his doorstep. Every year, who kills more people? Villains or heroes? Naomasa couldn't answer. Toshinori stumbled slightly as he stood up from the floor. He stuck his hands out towards Naomasa, the insides of his wrists pressed together. Toshi? Naomasa asked hesitantly. What? Toshinori asked. Aren't you going to arrest me? I won't resist. I will plead guilty. I don't need a lawyer or anything. Oh, Toshi. Naomasa put both his hands over his friend's much larger ones. I told you, being killed in a villain attack is natural. It's not the villain who's killing people. Toshinori looked down. It's me. I'm killing people. Heroes are killing people. That makes me a villain. Villains get arrested to face punishment for their crimes. No, I mean, yes, that's the way that works, but I don't think I'm explaining this correctly. What I mean is, there is no court in this country, maybe not even in the world, who would convict you. When you first started your career in Japan, the families of the first couple of people who died during your fight with villains attempted to sue you for wrongful death. I don't remember that happening. There is a reason for that. The Hero Public Safety Commission used a lot of money to silence a lot of people over the years. They used some of it to pay off a good number of lawmakers to legally make death by hero a natural cause. Then they make sure no one publishes anything about the deaths occurring as a result of heroes. It's always the villain's fault. Any family who makes too much of a fuss is quickly silenced in one way or another. They even make sure the heroes in question never hear a single word about their kills. So there's nothing I can do? I can't atone in any way? Toshinori asked, looking at Naomasa like a lost child. The best you can do is keep being a hero. I can guarantee you have saved far more people than you have killed. After all, you got All for One off the street. There is no telling how many more people he could have hurt if you hadn't caught him. But I'm not the one who caught him, am I? Toshinori asked, face blank. Well, maybe you didn't do it alone, but he wouldn't have been arrested if you hadn't been there. Toshinori was quiet for a moment, face scrunched up in thought while looking at the floor. Naomasa, Toshinori called his name. I think it's time for me to retire. What? Naomasa nearly shouted in shock. It's the perfect time. The next generation of heroes has shown they are perfectly capable of protecting Japan without me, and their hands are not yet stained with blood. Maybe I can help make sure they never are. You know the HPSC isn't going to allow you to retire. They aren't going to have a choice. Either they allow it, or I will tell the public about all the people I have killed. And I have plenty of money. They can't bribe me to keep me silent. But they can threaten you. With what? Toshinori chuckled. I don't have a family. You are my only friend, and I'm sure Nedzu would be willing to make you a teacher. Hell, he made me a teacher, and I don't have any sort of license, and have never worked with children in my life. What about Sir? Toshinori was silent for a moment. We haven't spoken in years, but I still care for him. He looked at his hand sadly, but with his quirk, he is more than capable of helping himself. Not to mention that intern of his. He will be fine. What if they threaten to reveal your true form, your name? Toshinori buzzes his lips. They can't threaten me with it if I reveal it during my press conference. Any other concerns? Well, no. Not that I can think of. What will you do about a successor? With All for One truly gone, I don't know if there is a need for One for All anymore, and it might do more harm than good if the way I used it is any indication. That's not true! The world will always need a hero like All Might. Villains are just getting stronger and stronger. We are going to need the strength of One for All. Toshinori laughed softly. I know you are trying to make me feel better, but there is no need for that. He looked at his friend sadly. I now know what this power has done, and I don't think I need to put that kind of legacy on anyone. No, this power dies with me, and I think you forget, even though villains are getting stronger, so are our heroes. I think they will be just fine without this quirk. I suppose we could even say they would do just fine with no quirk at all? Naomasa prompted, thinking about a certain green-haired, green-eyed youth. I don't think I would go that far, Toshinori said sheepishly. Toshi. Naomasa sighed in disappointment. Now, I know what you're going to say, but look at things realistically. Villains are getting stronger. Without the power to be able to keep up, there is nothing someone quirkless will be able to do. But don't we already have a hero hopeful that proved he could take care of himself? Against the run-of-the-mill criminal, maybe. But he would never be able to hold his own against any real villain. Didn't we just talk about how All for One was defeated with the help of that boy? And he did so without a quirk? You said so yourself. I was there, and I did most of the work. He would never have been able to defeat All for One alone. And neither would anyone else, Toshi. Even you would have had a difficult time defeating him on your own. Exactly. Toshinori frowned at Naomasa and clenched his fists. If even I could not defeat him on my own, what hope would anyone without a quirk have? I think you are forgetting something very important. Heroes don't work alone. What are you talking about? Heroes almost always work alone. No, they don't. The market is so saturated with heroes that unless they go out in the boonies, where crime is all but non-existent, it's physically impossible to go after a villain without another hero interfering. Because of that, more and more heroes are choosing to team up. I have never seen any hero team up. Toshinori crossed his arms. That's because you don't pay attention to anyone outside you and Endeavor. Naomasa sighed in exasperation. What was it going to take to get through to this man? Toshinori, all heroes work in teams. You are the outlier here. I don't know. Naomasa wanted to slap Toshinori so hard. How about you give it a try yourself? It's been a while since you have taken a sidekick. Toshinori steeled his gaze. I know what you are trying to do, Naomasa, but it is not going to work. I am going to retire. Then maybe you can get some help. It slipped out of Naomasa's mouth before he could stop it. I don't need help, Toshinori spit out. I will admit that they do not deserve to die, and their deaths will haunt me for the remainder of my days. But that does not mean quirkless people can be heroes. Toshinori turned his back on Naomasa, running his hand through his hair. I think it's time for you to leave. I have calls to make. Naomasa felt like he had been stabbed through the heart. All Might, Toshinori, had been his hero, his friend, for years. They had fought before, but never like this. He clenched his fist and turned to leave. At this moment, it was the only thing he could do. He would just have to try again later. And maybe then his blonde oaf would listen. End of chapter.